When I was a small child, I remember going to a video store and seeing a VHS copy of the movie Fright Night on the shelf, and I was immediately captivated by the movie's poster. The picture of the vampire face in the night sky really drew me in. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was my introduction into Fright Night. Released in 1985, it tells the story of teenager Charlie Brewster, a lover of classic horror movies, whom, after spotting some odd happenings from his bedroom window, believes that his new next-door neighbour Jerry is a vampire. And of course, Charlie's friends Amy and Evil Ed don't believe him. And after Charlie tries to expose Jerry, the smooth, slick, frightful vampire threatens to kill Charlie. Charlie manages to get help from Peter Vincent, a movie actor who starred in old Hammer Horror-esque vampire movies, whom knows all about how to kill vampires. Both Charlie and Peter must go next door and confront the menacing vampire on the Fright Night they'll never forget. Number 10. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. We all know the legend about the boy who cried wolf, in which a young boy keeps telling tales of atrocities that happen which aren't true. But when something bad finally does happen, no one believes him on the account of his bad habits of telling lies. Well, Fright Night director Tom Holland also wrote the script for Fright Night, and he wanted to base it on the notion of the boy who cried wolf, as he thought it would be an interesting and fun take on an old legend, giving it a more horrific, ghoulish approach. Biggest difference is Charlie doesn't tell lies, but has an extreme love for old horror movies, which leads people to believe his imagination gets the better of him, and that his paranoia is the result of his love of the horror genre.
Yes, Charlie. You've already caused your friends quite enough pain.
The whole time while writing it, and admits he loved the idea of a horror movie fan being convinced that his neighbour is in fact a vampire. So if anyone wanted to get any insights into the making of the movie, they wouldn't have been able to via the DVD, that's for sure.
I don't understand you. First you want to make love and then you don't.
Old Icons of Fright. I really like this idea. It's kind of sticking it to those behind the DVD release, who underestimated Fright Night and just assumed that no one would be interested in any other materials related to the movie. Despite the fact that the commentaries weren't official products of the Fright Night brand, they were eventually added to the Blu-ray release of the movie. Number 8. William Ragsdale auditioned for another 80s classic before he got the role of Charlie. In Fright Night, William Ragsdale plays the paranoid teenager Charlie Brewster, who is the main protagonist. In order for the movie to work, the audience has to be able to relate to his shock and terror of learning that his neighbour is a vampire and is out to get him, along with the added horror that no one believes him.
If he's not a vampire, have him touch this.
Oh, Charlie.
And thus putting his fear of his strange neighbour down to his love of old horror movies. And Ragsdale plays the part perfectly. However, shortly before he landed the role of Charlie, and she sent him to the audition by accident.
You really believe me, you poor dope.
Number 7. Chris. Well, back in the early production of Fright Night, Sarandon wasn't quite a big star yet. And when approached about taking on the role, he was a little apprehensive about it. To put it bluntly, he didn't want to do it.
Fool.
He hated the idea of playing a vampire, he hated the idea of starring in a horror movie, and he didn't really want to work with a first-time director. However, he quickly changed his mind when he read the script. And indeed, the captivating script won him over instantly, making him want to take part in the project. And adding to that, Sarandon also added some of his own ideas into the character, by making him part fruit bat, which is why we often see the character munching away on fruit. Was originally going to be the library ghost in Ghostbusters, was recycled and used as the giant vampire bat seen at the end of Fright Night, when Charlie and Peter Vincent have a final showdown with Jerry. The bat monster was rejected from Ghostbusters on the account it was believed to be too scary for that movie. And I'm not surprised on the account that this thing looks like an evil winged demon. However, it works perfectly here in Fright Night. Number 5. The origin of Peter Vincent's name. In Fright Night, we see the movie's secondary hero, the washed-up, middle-aged horror movie actor Peter Vincent, who hosts a midnight horror show called Fright Night, who by the end of the movie regains some of his motivation back into life. The character is a homage to old horror movies, and if you need proof of this, then just look at the character's name, Peter Vincent, as the character is named after Vincent Price and Peter Cushing, two legendary veterans of horror days. However, Roddy McDowall, who played Peter Vincent, also put his own spin on the character too, as he did not want to play the part like Vincent Price as originally scripted. He wanted to portray the character as a failed actor, just more or less starring as the same cheesy character in every movie he has starred in.
Now, I used to admire you, you know that? Well, of course, that was before I found out what a fake you were.
Which does give the character more of a washed-up, failed approach, and adds an extra dynamic into the character. However, jump to the 2010 back on the original movie, McDowall's approach of the role must have worked, as Vincent Price himself apparently loved the movie. Number 4. To date, there are 4 Fright Night movies. Whenever Fright Night gets brought up, more than often people are going to instantly think of the original 1985 movie. However, there was a sequel in 1988, which saw Charlie Brewster go to college, where this time Jerry's sister, Regine, is hunting the hapless teenager, and even takes over Peter Vincent's Fright Night show. For some strange reason, Fright Night 2 had very limited release, which I believe caused it to be not very well known and to slip under the radar, so to speak, because it's actually not really a bad film. Then in 2010 we got the remake, which is a retelling of the original Fright Night, only this time it's set in Las Vegas and feels more like a contemporary horror movie, rather than a homage to the horror days of old. As mentioned, the film stars David Tennant as Peter Vincent, and Colin Farrell as Jerry, who I think actually does a really good job and makes the character really creepy and sinister and intimidating. However, I find the remake hard to watch now, on the account of the death of its main star Anton Yelchin, who recently passed away. However, we then get Fright Night 2, New Blood, and this is where things get really confusing. Released in 2013, you would think that this straight-to-video release was a sequel to the 2010 remake, with them even following the tropes of the original Fright Night 2, of making the main villain a female vampire. But that's not true, as this is actually yet another remake of the original Fright Night. Yep, the same story just told all over again, only this time it really sucked. And calling it Fright Night 2 literally makes no sense. Number 3. Fright Night's comics. Released by Now Comics, which ran from 1988 to 1990, the Fright Night comics furthers the adventures of Charlie Brewster and Peter Vincent's struggles against the blood-sucking vampires of the night. In stories that include taking on bats who latch onto people's heads and control their bodies, along with a really bizarre issue where the police actually enlist Charlie and Peter's help to stop some menacing squid men. Okay. And another issue about a boy who can transform himself into a spider. In other words, this comic was pretty batshit insane, and had some wild and far out there ideas. The series would even see the return of the Evil Ed character, who wants to get out revenge on his old friend Charlie and even has gangs of minions. Number 2, the Fright Night sequel which never happened. Although as mentioned, Fright Night would go on to see a sequel and string of remakes, Tom Holland Number 1, alternative ending. Oh yeah, I had to save the weirdest for last, as the planned ending for Fright Night just would have been awful and would have really missed the mark had it not been changed, as the alternative ending would have seen Peter Vincent turn into a vampire while hosting a late night episode of Fright Night. This really does kind of go against the character's journey and development we see him go through in the film, so I'm glad this idea was binned. That, and it's just insanely similar to the ending of Howling, which sees a news reporter turn into a werewolf on live TV. So people would have just assumed that the ending was a rip-off, and thus might have not liked the movie as much, which could have affected its eventual cult status.